Lot 47, Byler Garden, back window. After the Stoltzfus bulk, the words hit the auction floor like a stone dropped on still water. 6 buyers in the main room, 2 lot runners pausing mid-step. Everyone heard it. Don Kratz said it, the way a man says something he has said 400 times. Flat, automatic, already moving on before the last syllable left his mouth. The whole floor kept breathing. Nobody froze. Not exactly. But something shifted. A clipboard lowered. A chair turned just slightly. You know that feeling? When someone is dismissed so completely, so casually, that the air itself registers it before the people do. She was at the loading dock side entrance. Ruth Baylor, 68 years old, a widowed market gardener in a plain dress and sturdy work boots, setting 2 flat crates of heirloom tomatoes on the dock lip. Each tomato wrapped in paper, each crate labeled in her own handwriting. She had been doing this since 1993. She was calm about it. A lot runner picked up the crates without looking at her. A young man with a clipboard watched from the far end of the dock. Don Kratz stepped back to the podium. Stoltzfus bulk moves first. Byler goes when we have time. He had never once asked Ruth Byler what she grew. But what Kratz didn't know, what he had genuinely never thought to look up, was that Ruth's per-pound average had led every grower on that auction floor for 11 consecutive years. $3.18 a pound. The floor average was $1.74. The number was on page 3 of a price log the floor clerk could print in 4 minutes. One man had already found it. You know how some things are sitting right in front of you the whole time, and it takes a stranger to finally see them. But before we get to that, let's go back about 31 years, to the spring of 1993, and a woman who drove the same road for the first time, nervous and absolutely certain at once. That Tuesday morning, at 5:45 a.m., Ruth Byler's headlights swept across the empty auction house parking lot. She was the first one there. She would be first every time, for 31 years running. But she didn't know that yet. She only knew the tomatoes in the back were packed right, and the drive from her farm, east of New Holland, took 10 minutes. And she had made that drive after a conversation with her husband Jacob that had settled something in her. The ground had been in his family since 1961. His parents broke it, cleared the hedgerow along the east field, put in the first drainage tile by hand. Jacob grew up knowing every wet corner and every shelf of red clay, and every place the soil ran deep and black and perfect. He handed all of that to Ruth one spring evening, not formally, not with paperwork, just by walking the rows with her and saying, "You see how the east block drains? That's why the tomatoes set early." He was teaching her what he knew. She was writing it down. She started the soil log in 1987. A black hardcover notebook, blue ink, 1 entry a week. She recorded pH, drainage observations, cover crop response, compost rates, what the beans said about nitrogen, and what the squash said about moisture. By 1993, when she brought her first lot to the auction, the notebook was 6 years deep. She already knew what the ground could do. Jacob died 12 years ago. In the spring after the funeral, Ruth planted a half-acre of dried beans. Beans require attention. You have to watch them. They give you something to do with your hands, and something to think about besides grief. And they reward careful work with a harvest you can hold. She planted that half acre because she needed to, and because Jacob would have understood exactly why. She has planted beans every spring since. The 4.2 acres sit 2 miles east of the auction house. Her neighbor, Walt Zimmerman, a corn and soybean man who has farmed the adjacent 80 for 30 years, calls it the best drained half-acre in the county. He doesn't say it lightly. He said it once to a seed rep who asked about the area. And the seed rep wrote it down, and Ruth never mentioned it to anyone. She has never borrowed operating money, never missed a mortgage payment, never asked Don Kratz for a thing. She grows 11 crops: heirloom tomatoes, brandywine, mortgage lifter, Cherokee purple, plus dried beans, winter squash, early greens, herb bundles, sweet onions, and a cutting flower row she added in 2009 because the market customers asked. She rotates every third year. The soil log tracks every decision. In 31 years of bringing lots to the New Holland produce auction, she has never received a premium buyer recommendation from Don Kratz. Not one. Kratz had managed the floor for 19 years when Marcus Webb walked in. At 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, Marcus Webb arrived at the New Holland produce auction carrying a printed price log under one arm and a sourcing brief in his bag. He was 34, employed by a 4-restaurant Philadelphia group, and he had driven 2.5 hours from the city specifically because the group's executive chef had tasted a tomato at a friend's dinner. A brandy wine, sliced thick, drizzled with good oil, and traced it back, through 2 conversations and a farmer's market receipt, to Lancaster County. Marcus had been tasked with finding the source and securing a supply agreement. He started where he always started, the records. The floor clerk, a quiet woman named Sandra, who had worked the front desk for 11 years, printed 3 years of price logs without being asked. Marcus had introduced himself, explained what he was looking for, and she had pulled up the historical data and printed it before he finished his sentence. She didn't say anything about it. She just handed him the pages with a paperclip. Marcus took the log to Don Kratz's office. "I'm looking for growers with long-term heirloom programs," he said. "Consistent quality, direct supply potential. Who do you recommend?" Kratz leaned back in his chair. He had a list. He always had a list. "3 operations you'll want to see," he said. He named a 200-acre family farm in Leola. Their volume was substantial, their packaging consistent, their buyers reliable. He named a greenhouse cooperative that ran year-round on supplemental heat and moved steady volume into the Philadelphia market already. He named a young grower who had been profiled in a regional food magazine the previous spring. Good story, good brand. Exactly the kind of narrative a restaurant group liked to attach to their sourcing. He did not name Ruth Beeler. Marcus thanked him and began reading the price log. By the time he reached the 3rd page, he had stopped walking. He was standing in the middle of the auction floor, people moving around him, and he was reading a name he had circled with his pen. Ruth Beeler. Per pound average, 11 years running, $3.18. The floor average for the same period, $1.74. He went back to Kratz. "Tell me about Ruth Beeler," he said. He set the 3rd page on the desk and pointed to the circled row. Kratz looked at the page. "Small grower," he said. "Inconsistent volume." He said it the same way he'd said it every time anyone had ever asked, which was almost never. You'd be better served by suppliers who can guarantee delivery scale. The restaurant market needs consistency and reliability. And no offense to Ruth, 4.2 acres is not a commercial supply operation. Marcus looked at the number, then at Kratz. What's her volume? Kratz said he'd have to check the records. He did not move toward the records. The number was on the page Marcus was holding. Can I see the floor? Marcus said. Kratz gave him the tour. He walked him through the main buyer stalls, the large operations with dedicated windows, the established relationships, the premium buyer slots, and how they worked. He explained volume requirements and packaging standards, and why scale mattered for premium placement. He was helpful and thorough, and he believed every word he said. Through the dock window, visible the whole time, Ruth's lot was stacked in the back corner. No buyer window, not mentioned. What about the back window growers? Marcus asked. Not typically on the buyer directory, Kratz said. Back window is for transitional supply. Ruth Beeler had been transitional for 31 years. Marcus thanked Kratz again and walked to the loading dock. You've probably already figured out what he found there. Ruth was at her crates. She was writing lot numbers on the second set, her marker moving in the careful block letters she used for everything. She heard footsteps but did not look up immediately. Lot runners came through regularly, and she had learned long ago not to expect a buyer to walk her direction without a reason. These your tomatoes? She looked up. A young man in a sport coat, the price log folded under one arm, a bag over his shoulder. They are, she said. Marcus unfolded the price log and turned it to face her. He pointed to her row. Her name, her average, 11 years of it, the highest number on the page. Your per pound has been first on this floor 11 years straight, he said. Does Kratz know that? Ruth looked at the number. She had never seen this printout before. She had never been shown it. She had produced it every season, every lot, every carefully picked tomato wrapped in paper, and it had been sitting in the floor's own records the entire time, and Don Kratz had never once looked at it. He does, she said. There was a moment of silence. A forklift moved in the far bay. Someone called a lot number over the intercom. Then Don Kratz came through the interior door onto the dock. He had seen them through the office window. The sourcing rep and the back window grower, both looking at a printed page. He moved across the dock with the purposeful walk of a man who manages things. Marcus, he said, I can connect you with our formal contract team if you're looking to establish a supply relationship. This really should go through the floor. He glanced at Ruth. Ruth's operation is a good one, but it doesn't have the infrastructure for a direct restaurant supply relationship. No cold storage on site, limited delivery capacity. Ruth said quietly, I have a walk-in cooler built in 2009. I deliver to Philadelphia twice a month already. Kratz said, that's an informal arrangement, not commercial scale. Ruth did not argue. She looked at Marcus and said, do you want to see the crop calendar? She opened her clipboard. 2 typed pages, single-spaced, 1 line per week for the coming season. What would be planted, when it would be ready, what the projected lot sizes were, what varieties were available in each window. It was specific. It was precise. It was the kind of document that takes years of careful observation to produce accurately. And Ruth had been producing it for a decade. Marcus read it. He did not go back inside with Kratz. He pulled a pen from his bag. Kratz stood on the dock for another moment. Then he said to Marcus, "I'll be happy to arrange introductory sessions with the 3 growers I mentioned. The floor can facilitate all the contract paperwork. It's the professional route. Protects both parties." Marcus said he would be in touch. Then he sat down at the dock table with Ruth's soil log and the crop calendar and the price log. And he was there for 2 hours. This is the moment worth slowing down for. If you've ever been the person whose record was sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone to read it, you know this feeling. The patience it takes. The absolute certainty that the work is right, paired with the absolute absence of anyone to confirm it. 31 years of back windows and second passes and lot runners who didn't look up. And then one man walks the length of the dock with a printed page. Ruth answered every question Marcus asked. The soil rotation system. She explained the 3-year cycle, the way the bean year fed the tomato year. The pH management she had been tracking since 1987. The harvest timing she picked at peak ripeness, not at transport spec, because she had never had a buyer who asked for transport spec. She would adjust if asked. She had the flexibility because she had the knowledge. The delivery logistics, she drove the Philadelphia run in a refrigerated van. She bought used in 2014 and maintained herself twice monthly, coordinated with 2 other market vendors to split the fuel cost. Marcus photographed 12 pages of the soil log for the contract file. At 2:47 p.m., Marcus Webb set a supply agreement on the dock table. 3 years, heirloom tomatoes, dried calypso beans, winter squash, per Ruth's crop calendar. The contract value over 3 years, $94,000. The pricing was indexed to her per pound average, not the floor average, her average. Ruth read the agreement twice. It took 12 minutes. She read slowly and she read carefully, the way she read anything that mattered, the way she had read every entry in the soil log before writing the next one. Don Kratz came out onto the dock. He said to Marcus, "I can connect you with our formal contract team. This should go through the floor." Ruth looked up from the agreement. "Does the floor get a cut?" Kratz said that was how the arrangement worked. That was how it had always worked. The floor facilitated premium relationships. There was a structure. There was a process. Ruth said, "I've given this floor 31 years. She set the pen down and looked at Kratz with the particular calm of a woman who has spent 3 decades watching and waiting. "I think I'll sign at the table." She signed. Marcus signed. Kratz stood on the dock with his clipboard and said nothing. The light was going flat on the loading dock, the kind of late September afternoon light that makes everything look like it has been waiting for exactly this. Ruth handed Marcus the soil log and told him to photograph whatever he needed. She had kept every entry, every week, every year, every observation about drainage and pH, and what the beans said about the ground, and what the squash said about the season. She was always ready for someone to ask. She had simply been waiting a long time. Marcus photographed the last 12 pages, while Ruth sealed the duplicate copy of the agreement in an envelope. Kratz went back inside. Through the interior window, you could see him at his podium, calling the next lot. Here is what you should know about what happened next. Ruth's first direct delivery ran 6 weeks after the signing. 2 lugs of Brandywine, 1 of mortgage lifter, 6 boxes of dried calypso beans, 4 boxes of cured Hubbard squash. The restaurant's executive chef, a man named David Park, who had been looking for exactly this quality of heirloom tomato since he opened the restaurant 4 years ago, photographed the crates and posted the image without naming the farm. He posted it because he was proud of the sourcing and because the crates were packed in a way that told you something about the person who packed them. Each tomato still wrapped in paper. Each crate labeled by variety in Ruth's handwriting. Within 2 weeks, 3 other Philadelphia area restaurants contacted the group's sourcing rep asking for a referral. Marcus gave each of them the same answer. She's at capacity for this season. Talk to her in January. Ruth's daughter, Ellen, who had been telling her mother to lease the ground for the last 2 years, was in the parking lot the day of the signing. She had driven over at noon because she had a feeling, and the feeling was right. She watched from the lot as Marcus and her mother sat at the dock table with papers spread between them. She didn't come in. She waited. When Ruth came out, Ellen said, "Did you know this was coming?" Ruth said, "No, I knew the soil log was right. That was enough." The following spring, Don Kratz's auction floor reported a 4.1% drop in premium buyer attendance. He did not connect the two facts. He pulled more volume from the Leola operation and added a digital listing system and hired a marketing coordinator. Ruth planted the spring beans on the back half-acre, the way she did every year. The soil log continued. 1 entry a week, blue ink, black cover. The next entry noted that the winter squash had performed at the high end of projection. The brandywines had averaged 9.3 ounces at harvest, and the calypso beans had dried clean with no split skins. She noted the delivery schedule for the Philadelphia account and the pH reading from the East block, which was sitting at 6.4, which was exactly right. She closed the notebook and set it on the kitchen shelf next to 35 years of identical notebooks, each one dated on the spine. There is a kind of patience that is not passivity. You know this kind if you have ever trusted the work when no one else was looking. Ruth Beeler did not wait for Don Kratz to see her. She waited for the record to find someone who could read it. Those are not the same weight. One of them hollows you out. The other one built something. 31 years of best-trained half-acre in the county. 31 years of back window after the Stoltzfus bulk. One man who walked the length of the loading dock with a price log and asked if those were her tomatoes. She had been ready for that question since 1987. If you've ever worked somewhere, no one was watching. If you've ever kept the record when nobody asked you to, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you kept and why you kept it. And if someone in your life is doing the quiet work, the careful work, the work that builds without an audience, share this with them. Hit the like button. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because the next story has an old machine, a frozen morning, and a man who spent 3 winters getting it right, and the day it finally mattered is one you will not see coming. Sandra, the floor clerk who had printed the price log without being asked, watched Marcus and Ruth through the interior window for most of those 2 hours. She had worked the desk for 11 years. She had printed thousands of pages of data for buyers who came through the floor. She had printed that specific historical record, 3 pages, Ruth's name on page 3, for Marcus without fanfare, because he asked, and because she knew what was on page 3, and because in 11 years no one had ever asked her to print it before. She did not tell Don Kratz she had printed it. She watched them sign from the far end of the dock. She saw Kratz come out, and she saw his face when Ruth said she'd sign at the table. She went back to the front desk and filed the day's paperwork. On her way out that evening, she stopped at the dock and looked at the table where they had sat. The ring from a water glass, a pen cap, a small rectangle of blue ink, where Marcus had tested his pen before signing. She didn't say anything to anyone. She drove home the way she always drove home, but she remembered the afternoon. She would remember it for a long time. There were two neighboring growers who watched the contract exchange from 30 feet away. Ben Hostetler was one of them. A squash and melon grower, 43 years old, third generation on his family's land. He had been at the auction since dawn and had a good day. Volume through the premium window. His prices solid. He watched Ruth sign, and he watched Kratz stand on the dock, and he watched Marcus photograph the soil log. He did not say anything that afternoon, but 3 weeks later, at a county growers meeting, he mentioned it. He said, "That Beeler woman signed a 3-year Philadelphia contract at the dock, $94,000. Read the price log." The room was quiet for a moment. Someone asked how long she'd been averaging $3.18. Ben said, 11 years. Kratz never told a premium buyer. The room stayed quiet a little longer after that. Ruth was not at that meeting. She was at the farm, turning the cover crop on the east block. The beans had come off clean. The winter squash was curing in the barn. The soil log entry for that week noted good drainage response on the west quarter and a satisfactory pH reading on the new bean ground. She wrote it in blue ink in the black notebook. She closed the notebook. She set it on the shelf with the others. The following May, Marcus Webb called to discuss the spring crop calendar. He asked about the early tomato window, when the brandywines would be ready, and whether she could hold volume for a June delivery. She told him she could. She told him the East Block was in its bean rotation year, and the tomatoes would be on the West Block, which ran slightly warmer in early season, which typically moved her ready date up by a week. She read him the relevant entry from the soil log. He took notes. He asked if she had ever been approached by other buyers. She said 2 had contacted her since October. One was a specialty grocer in Lancaster who had heard from David Park's restaurant. One was another Philadelphia restaurant group, smaller than Marcus's. Marcus asked what she told them. She said she told them she was at capacity for the coming season and they could talk in January. He said, "Mark, good." She said, "I know." There is something worth saying here. For anyone who has been waiting a long time for the right person to ask the right question. The wait does not mean the work was wrong. It does not mean you were wrong to believe in what you were building. Ruth Beeler did not spend 31 years producing the highest per-pound average on the New Holland auction floor because she expected Don Kratz to notice. She did it because it was right, because Jacob had showed her what the ground could do, and she had spent 31 years finding out if he was right. And he was, and the soil log proved it. The right person will eventually find the record. Not always in 31 years. Sometimes sooner. Sometimes, honestly, never. And that is its own grief. But the record is the record. The $3.18 average is the $3.18 average. No amount of back windows and second passes and transitional supply designations changes what the data says. The floor clerk can print it in 4 minutes. Ruth knew this. She had always known this. She had simply been waiting for someone who could read it. The soil log on her kitchen shelf is now 38 volumes. Blue ink. 1 entry a week. The notation from the week the contract was signed reads, September Agreement, Philadelphia 3 years. East Block, EH 6.4. Beans next year. Drainage excellent. She closed the notebook. She set it on the shelf. She went out to check the cover crop. The work was the same as it had always been. The ground had not changed. The record had not changed. Only the person reading it was new. Let's go back to the morning of that first auction in 1993, because that morning is where everything starts. Ruth had been awake since 4. She had picked the first tomatoes the evening before. Brandywines, Cherokee purples, a handful of early mortgage lifters. And she had wrapped each one in paper by the light of the barn and packed the crates carefully, the way her mother had packed things, with attention. Jacob was at the house. He had offered to drive her. She said she wanted to go alone. She drove the 10-minute road in the dark. She pulled into the parking lot while the sky was still gray. She sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, looking at the building. It was nothing impressive. A metal auction structure, wide loading bays, the kind of facility that smells of produce and cold air and diesel from the lot runners' trucks. She had been to auctions with Jacob, had watched the buying and selling, had understood the basic machinery of it, but she had never been the grower bringing the lot. She had never been the one waiting to see what her work was worth. She got out and unloaded the crates. Don Kratz was there by 7. He walked the lots, made his clipboard notations, assigned the windows. He looked at Ruth's crates and wrote, Baylor, back window. Lot 47. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask what varieties she was bringing or what her picking protocol was or how she managed the soil. He had 30 lots to manage and an auction to run. She was 4.2 acres in the back window. Her lot sold at $1.62 a pound. She sat in the truck afterward and did the math. It was not what she had hoped for. It was not by her calculation what the fruit was worth, but it was a number. It was a start. She wrote it in the margin of the notebook she had brought, not the soil log, a different notebook, a record of the market, and she drove home and told Jacob. He said, Next year you'll know more. She said, I already know more. He smiled. He said she was probably right. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Every auction, every season, 31 years, without missing one. The per pound climbed slowly, not because Kratz noticed, not because she got a premium window, but because the quality kept improving, and the buyers who did bid on back window lots learned that the Baylor lot was the one worth waiting for. Some of them told other buyers. Word moved, the way it moves through markets, slowly and without announcement. By 2003, her average was $2.40 a pound. By 2010, it was $2.98. By 2013, it crossed $3 and stayed there. Kratz did not change her window assignment. He did not change her designation. She was still back window after the Stoltzfus bulk lot 47 or thereabouts, every single Tuesday. She never asked him to change it. She had her own sense of the thing. The work was the work. The record was the record. Someday, someone would read it. If not at this auction, then at the farmer's market, which she had started in 2008 when she realized she needed another channel. If not at the farmer's market, then through one of the two Philadelphia vendors she had begun selling to informally. A specialty grocer, a restaurant supply buyer who had found her at the market and asked for a direct price. The soil log built every year. The crop rotation continued. The dried beans went in on schedule after each tomato block, fixing nitrogen, improving the structure, making next year's tomatoes better than last year's. She noted this in the log. She noted everything in the log. The whole 4.2 acres was documented, season by season, in blue ink. In 2019, she had the walk-in cooler replaced, new compressor, better temperature control, 12-hour backup power. She paid for it in cash from the season's returns. She noted it in the farm's records. She noted the approximate value added to direct delivery capacity. She did not mention it to Kratz. She was not building something for Don Kratz to notice. She was building something that was worth noticing. Marcus Webb found it on a Tuesday morning in late September, on the third page of a price log a floor clerk printed in 4 minutes, and he walked to the loading dock and asked if those were her tomatoes, and she said they were, and the rest of it happened the way good things sometimes happen. Without drama, without announcement, simply and clearly, the way a well-drained field produces good fruit year after year in the quiet dark of the growing season. The soil log entry for the week of the signing read, September Agreement, Philadelphia, 3 years, East Block, pH 6.4, beans next year. She was already thinking about next year. At 7:22 a.m. on the morning, Marcus arrived at the auction. Ruth had already been at the dock for 90 minutes. She had arrived before the lot runners, before the main buyers, before Kratz's podium was even set up. She had unloaded both crates, wrapped the last dozen tomatoes individually at the tailgate of her truck, labeled the varieties by hand, and set the crates on the dock lip with the lot number in her block printing facing out. She had done this 412 times. The lot runner who came for the crates was a young man named Tyler, 19 years old, second season, working the dock. He picked up the crates without looking at her, the way the lot runners always did, because the crates were crates and the dock was busy, and there was no reason to look at the grower. Ruth watched him carry them to the back corner and stack them under the hand-lettered sign that said, Back Window, Secondary Buyers. She watched him set them down with one corner not quite level and did not say anything. The corner settled on its own. She went to the side table where she kept her clipboard and sat on the folding chair she brought every week. She took out the soil log. She brought it to every auction, had brought it since 2001, because she sometimes made notes about market response and variety performance that informed the following season's decisions. She opened it to the current entry page and read back through the last 3 weeks of observations. At the far end of the dock, the young man with the clipboard was watching her. She had noticed him when she arrived. He wasn't a lot runner. Wrong kind of clipboard, wrong kind of bag. A buyer, maybe. He had been standing at the end of the dock for 10 minutes, looking from the price log in his hands to the crates on the dock, back and forth, the way someone looks when they are trying to match a number to an object. She waited. He walked the length of the dock and stopped in front of her crates. These your tomatoes? She looked up, "They are," she said. "You know what happened after that. But what you don't know, what no one ever asked Ruth directly, was what she felt in that moment. She has said to her daughter that she felt something release. Not dramatically, nothing dramatic about Ruth Baylor, but something that had been holding its breath for a very long time, took one slow breath in and let it go. The way a field after a long dry spell takes the first real rain. Not gratefully, not dramatically, just deeply, all the way down to the root level. She had the soil log in her lap. She had the crop calendar on the clipboard. She had been producing the highest per pound average on that floor for 11 years. She was ready. Don Kratz's floor continued. The premium buyer attendance dropped that following spring 4.1%. Not catastrophic, not headline news. He adjusted. He added the digital listing system, brought in a marketing coordinator, invested in a new grading camera for the main window line. He did not connect the drop to the buyer contract. He knew only that the Tuesday he came out onto the dock and said this should go through the floor. Ruth Byler had looked at him with the particular steadiness of a woman who had been patient for 31 years and said she would sign at the table. He had not known what to say to that. The soil log continued. The crop calendar continued. The cover crops came and went. The beans fixed the nitrogen and the tomatoes used it, and the squash cured in the barn. The East Block pH held at 6.4. Ruth noted the yield projections in blue ink, 1 entry a week. She was always going to be ready for someone to ask. Here is the thing about 31 years. 31 years is not a short time to wait. It is not the kind of wait that people celebrate. Nobody writes about 31 years of back windows. Nobody profiles the grower who showed up every Tuesday before dawn for 3 decades and was assigned the same slot every time without once receiving the recognition that the record showed she had earned. There is no drama in 31 years of arriving first and leaving last and doing the work correctly and being overlooked in the precise, institutional, unhurried way that Don Kratz had overlooked Ruth Baylor, not out of cruelty, but out of a fixed assumption about what 4 acres could produce and what a back window deserved. But the record does not care about the drama. The record just adds up. $3.18 a pound, 11 years running. The floor average was $1.74. Marcus Webb circled Ruth's name in the margin of the 3rd page before he had even asked the floor clerk who had printed the log. He circled it with a blue pen, the same blue as Ruth's notebook ink, which is coincidence, but feels like something anyway, and walked across the auction floor looking for Kratz's office and looking at the number and thinking about what it meant. It meant the best heirloom tomatoes in Lancaster County had been going out the back window of this auction house for 11 years. It meant the chef who had tasted one at a friend's dinner and said that is the tomato, that is exactly the tomato had been right. It meant that what Don Kratz called insufficient volume was actually the most precise and considered production on the floor, managed by a woman with a soil log going back to 1987 and a crop calendar that specified what would be ready each week of the season. It meant someone had to walk to the back window and ask. Marcus was that person. Not because he was particularly heroic, not because he had gone looking for Ruth Baylor specifically, because he had asked the floor clerk to print the price log. And the floor clerk had printed it, and he had read it, and the number on page 3 was unambiguous. That is all it took. 31 years, and a man who read the record. Ruth's daughter Ellen had been telling her mother for 2 years to lease the ground to Walt Zimmerman's operation. It was not a cruel suggestion, it was a practical one. Ellen was watching her mother work alone, no hired hands, just Ruth and the crops and the soil log. And she was watching the auction income stay flat, and she was watching her mother drive the Philadelphia run twice a month in a used refrigerated van, and she thought, there has to be an easier way. She said this kindly. She said it with genuine love and genuine concern. She did not know about the price log. She did not know what the record said. She had not seen the soil log in years. The day of the signing, Ellen was in the parking lot. She had driven over because she had a feeling her mother needed something, and she did not know what. She watched through the lot as Marcus and Ruth sat at the dock table with the agreement between them. She watched Kratz come out, and she watched the exchange, and she watched Ruth sign. She did not go in. She sat in her car and watched. When Ruth came out to the lot, Ellen said, "Was that a contract?" Ruth said, 3-year supply agreement, Philadelphia Restaurant Group. Ellen said, "How much?" Ruth said, $94,000 over 3 years. Ellen looked at her, then at the dock, then back at her mother. "Mom," she said, and she didn't say anything else for a moment. Then, "Did you know this was coming?" Ruth said, "No. I knew the soil log was right." That was enough. Ellen got out of her car and hugged her mother. Ruth held on for a moment, the way she had held on at Jacob's funeral, privately and firmly, not making a show of it. Then she stepped back and said, "The squash is curing. I need to go check the barn." She drove home on the same road she had driven 412 times. The squash was fine. She checked it anyway. There are people in your life who have been building something quietly for longer than you know, with better results than anyone has bothered to measure. You know who they are, if you think about it. The ones who show up before anyone else and leave after everyone else and never raise their voice and never ask for the recognition they have earned. The ones whose records are sitting in a file or a notebook or a log that nobody has ever printed out or read. Somebody needs to walk to the back window and ask. Maybe that person is you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that the record is the record, and it adds up, and the right person is going to find it. Leave me a comment about the quiet work in your life. Hit that subscribe button so the next story finds you. It's coming soon, and it starts with a 1969 tractor, a man who spent 3 winters getting it right, and a morning in Iowa when every modern machine on 3 farms went dark.